Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this session. My name is Arif. This is Sean. And today we're going to talk about how to create a data and analytics culture at scale. And this talk is one outcome of the very successful partnership between ThoughtWorks and Scout24. And as I'm from ThoughtWorks, let me quickly say a few sentences about ThoughtWorks. So ThoughtWorks is an IT consultancy at core. In comparison to the big IT consultancies, we're quite a bit smaller, but we're a truly global company, being present in 14 countries across the globe. And we believe a lot in diversity, and we actually believe that we can make the world a better place with what we do. And also we believe very much in open knowledge, which is why you will see that ThoughtWorkers are very active in terms of writing books, speaking at conferences, and so on. And in case you didn't know ThoughtWorks as a company, you may have read articles by Martin Fowler, who is our chief scientist, or you may have seen the ThoughtWorks Technology Radar, which is a biannual report about current technology trends and so on. And of course, we're hiring, so in case you're interested or just curious about the company, yeah, just talk to me later.
Yes, and I'm Sean, so I'm the other side of this partnership. ThoughtWorks was invited to Scout24 to help with this project and with actually many projects. We have lots of ongoing relationships with them. I'm the product owner for the data landscape at Scout24. So that is sort of the product-oriented person who helps the data engineering and data science and analytics teams develop internal products for the whole organization. So what is Scout24? So if you were in the previous session, the guy said that you can make everything cooler by adding 365 to the end. Germany thought that you could make everything cooler by adding 24 to the end about 15 years ago. So it's not so cool anymore, but there were lots of 24s, lots of Scout 24s. This, Friend Scout, Finance Scout, I don't know, there were lots of them. But there are really just two left in this company. That's Immobilien Scout and Auto Scout. Because we've been around for many years, we're sort of an old, traditional internet company. We were owned by the telecom at some point in time. And we've had to evolve many times over that journey. But through that evolution, we've established ourselves across Europe. We have a minor presence in Eastern Europe and a little bit in Scandinavia and Sweden. Nothing in Norway, unfortunately. But our main focus is in Germany and in Western Europe. So Immobilien Scout is the largest property platform for buying and selling and renting flats and houses and commercial properties in Germany, and a strong presence in Austria. And Auto Scout is the largest online platform for buying and selling used and new cars across Europe. So there's a lot. This is a big company with lots of money, a very profitable company. That at its core is knowledge about the property marketplace and the automotive marketplace. This is very valuable data. So we really treat data and data-driven decision-making as sort of our core competency. So as I said, it's an old company. It's evolved over the years. I want to begin by setting some context by explaining our journey to microservices as one of these technology changes that we've done over the years. So I have to take you back to 2007. Many of you have probably seen this architecture. It's not so difficult, but it was very standard, 3-tier, web tier, middle tier, core database, running Oracle. I think this was .NET stuff. I don't know. I wasn't around then, but it doesn't really matter. This was the foundation of the technical stack. And we thought in 2007, let's institute a team of analysts to begin data-driven decision-making and begin to really treat our data as a first-class citizen. So we settled on a BI tool, which was MicroStrategy, created a team of analysts, and of course, we needed something in between. So there was a new team called the BI development team that set up a data warehouse. It did this by creating a staging database that pulled data from the core database. It also pulled data from our CRM system, collected it all in one central place. And this central team, this BI development team, curated and maintained and made available to the company the data of the whole company. So sort of this centrally managed data team. And the company evolved, the technical architecture evolved, it got a little bit messier, it got a little bit more complicated. There began to be a lot more load on this core database running Oracle. And you see the dollar signs behind that, that's because this was very, very, very expensive to maintain. Very different load profiles on this database, some for reporting, some for the operations, the app versus APIs. It became a mess to have this centralized database. And this is the core reason why we chose to break up the monolith and move to microservices. A pretty standard thing. You know, probably a lot of companies from this era have done exactly the same thing. So we began to split it up. We began to associate each individual microservice with its own persistence layer. So we end up with Elasticsearch for search. We end up with MySQL databases for the various apps. Lots of APIs pushing data into different places, apps connecting actually to multiple databases. And we fell in love with the Hadoop ecosystem and started a team around the, we called it data engineering, DE on this slide. So there's a whole new team whose job it was to build up and maintain and support this new style of big data infrastructure and the start of machine learning in our company. As the microservice journey continues, you take it to its logical extreme and you add the cloud in the mix, in this case AWS, there becomes many different microservices, all with very different backend technologies, all with rapidly changing needs for data and definitions of data. So you see this gets a little bit messy. We actually had a designer look at this slide and clean it up for us. I'm disappointed they did that because this slide was super messy before, and it basically mirrored the mood of this whole architecture and the company at the time. Just everything was spread out exactly like microservices tells us we should do. Autonomy in the teams, they can do whatever they want. But you notice here this central data warehouse didn't change through the evolution. From 2007 until 2015, this core team had the same responsibilities, the same infrastructure, everything was the same. And that was a serious problem because everybody else was autonomous, the data team was not. And to have tight feedback loops using data to improve the products, you needed to involve that central team. So we became, this BI development team became the central bottleneck of the entire organization. We realized that you can't do a microservices migration without also democratizing or federating the data consumption and production within the organization. So 2015, or actually shortly thereafter, 2017, we put all that aside, left that as it was, and built a new data landscape built in the cloud, in AWS. This is all fairly standard at this point in time, but a central data lake based on S3, where some of this data was pumped into the data warehouse so that we could still use it, but also the BI tool was connected directly to the data lake. We had a REST API, a custom one that pumped events from the apps themselves, consumer events. You know, click here, click there, to collect all those up. Instead of sending them to the on-premise Hadoop, we send them directly into the data lake, so everything's there. And we configure the core databases to push data, the CRM to push data, and all of the other APIs to also push data into the data lake. That's the technical thing that we built. We also, you see here, the BI development and the data engineering teams were effectively merged. We said we don't want two different competencies within the organization. We want to merge these organizational structures into one. There's one central data team that is responsible for this data platform. Now, this whole architecture and this organizational change and the technical change fit the microservices architecture perfectly. We're extremely proud of this. We think it's the right way to go technologically. just like in 2007, where the Oracle data warehouse and this structure perfectly matched the organizational structure at the time, this new data lake structure perfectly matches our current philosophy for product development. So we're happy with that. There's one, I'm saying but, I'm implying a but here, but Scout24 doesn't want to build a data lake. They don't want to build a data warehouse. That's not the goal of the company. The goal of the company is to make great products. And we believe the way to do that is to become data-driven as a company, as a whole. So these are all tools that we're building for some end, for some value that we want to attain. And what does data-drivenness mean in this context, a simplified context? It means fast and easy data-driven product development. It means tight iterations. It means autonomous choices. It means that everybody in the organization can collect the data that they need to make the decisions that they need to drive the products and the product development forward. And this core team, this data and analytics team, which is not big, this is 8 people essentially. This is my team, the core team, the data team. We support that data-driven decision-making. But somehow, and we want to do this everywhere in the company. We want all the different autonomous teams to have this kind of thinking and this opportunity to learn from the data in some way that doesn't bloat up my team. We can't hire more than 8 data engineers. In the German market, we just can't find these people. It takes forever to train them. We really can't find enough people to do that. And we wouldn't want it anyways, right? It's a much better approach to find some way to distribute that responsibility into the organization itself, to scale the capabilities of data the same way that we scaled the capabilities of product development through autonomous teams. So somehow we needed to do this. And I think this was not a technical change or an organizational change. This was a cultural change. We need to somehow convince the company to stop thinking of data as a product of this core team to something where they believe they own the data themselves. It's not, they don't have to rely on somebody else. We want them to be active participants in the entire data landscape. And because this is a big cultural change and because we didn't have much success doing this in the past, we brought ThoughtWorks in, and Arif was a central core member of this partnership to find a way for us to kick off this cultural change within the organization. And we did that through the Data Landscape Manifesto, and I'll hand it over to Arif to describe exactly what this is.
Cool. Thank you, Sean. So now specifically to help with that cultural change that Sean mentioned, one of the first things we felt we can help with was to create a strong alignment across the entire company how to deal with data. And as a means to create this alignment, we came up with what we call the Data Landscape Manifesto. And in the past, or before that, we made the experience that many of the issues that appeared had to do with unclear responsibilities or simply a responsibility structure that hadn't changed for almost a decade. Also, as Sean nicely showed with the architecture diagram there. So therefore, this Data Landscape Manifesto is very much about responsibilities, about roles, and about values. And it consists of 7 principles, and we look into 6 of them today. So let's go ahead here. So the first one is kind of a preamble. And here we say that data is a key asset of our company. And the underlying belief here is that Scout can only build the right products and provide the right services to its customers and its users if Scout understands its customers and users. And Scout can only understand its users through data, by analyzing the data, the behavior data of their users, and really analyzing this data. So ultimately, Scout as a company can only be successful with this data. And this statement here, I mean, this is nothing surprising these days, right? But we still wanted to start off with this because, as I said, this is all about alignment. So we wanted to make sure right in the beginning that everyone understands why this is important and why we're doing all of this. So then, as the first kind of actual principle, we state the responsibility of the central data team. As I said, this is a lot about clear responsibilities, and we wanted to start off with our responsibility, so to say, because this is kind of written from the perspective of that central data team. And here we say, we, data and analytics, we are responsible for providing a solid data platform, as well as clear guidelines and training how to participate in the data landscape. Now, I introduced two terms here. The one is data landscape, and the other one is data platform. And the data landscape is this large transparent area here, and it sits on top of a thin layer, which is the data platform. And we imagine the data landscape as kind of the playground in which data producers and data consumers interact and exchange data and work with data. And the data platform provides the tools, the guidelines, the rules that enable the participants in that data landscape to work with each other. And now, the central data team, we own the data platform, and it's our core responsibility to provide that data platform. However, interestingly, we do not own the data landscape. So with this, I come to the third principle here, which is about autonomy. And I mean, all of this is about scaling data usage across the company. And we believe that you can only scale that far with autonomous teams. So data autonomy is kind of mandatory here, but data autonomy must not become data anarchy. So here we say data autonomy puts data producers and data consumers in control of their data and of their metrics, and thereby allows us to be data-driven at scale, but it comes with responsibility. So here I introduced three roles, right? The one role in the middle is kind of the central data team, the data experts, so to say. And on the left side, you see the role of the data producer. And on the right side, you see the role of the data consumer. Now, to help you, to make it easier to follow along with those principles, let me explain you a simplified example here. So let's say we have a checkout service. And I mean, the checkout service is pretty much what you think it is. Every e-commerce company, et cetera, has a checkout service. It manages orders, maybe connects to some payment system or so. And let's assume that this checkout service is an individual service that is maintained by a separate team. And then in the middle, you see there is this central data lake that Sean mentioned before. And there is one piece of the data platform, which is the data catalog. And as I said, the central data team, the data and analytics, DNA, how we call it, team, we take ownership and responsibility for that piece of the data platform. And then on the right, we see there is a special offer service. And this special offer service, well, it provides special offers to customers and by looking at the order history of those users. And let's assume, again, that this is a service that is maintained by a separate team. And for the sake of this example, this is going to be the role of the data consumer. So now with this kind of setup in mind, let's look at the fourth principle, which is the producer's responsibility. And here we say data producers are responsible for publishing data to the central data lake, for the data's quality, and for publishing metadata that makes it easy to find and consume the data. So what does this mean in this example here? The checkout service, or specifically the people in the checkout service team, they have the responsibility to publish order events to the central data lake. Ideally, exhaustive order events that describe in detail like what orders happened and what is going on there. And then on top of that, they also have the responsibility to publish event metadata to this data catalog. And this means that the metadata actually explains what is in those order events, what the individual fields mean, how it's structured, etc. And this is quite a lot of responsibility for the producer, the checkout service team here. But we believe that ultimately the responsibility for those things cannot be anywhere else, because actually only the people that actually build that service, they really know what is in the data. So they have to be the ones that describe what's in the data. If someone else tries to explain it, he may explain it in a wrong way. And also, ultimately, they are the only ones who can guarantee that the correct data is actually delivered to the central data lake.
Yes, and I'll jump in here to give an example of how does this work in practice, essentially. So we notice how we've given a lot more responsibility to the producing team. Instead of, in the previous world, the central team pulled the data that they thought was necessary and cleaned it up and committed to it, maintained it. Now that responsibility is on the producer. The producer has to push data into the data lake. Since they're dealing with technology and infrastructure that they don't really know much about, it's also our responsibility to make that as easy as possible for them to accomplish this. So one of the things is a simple ingestion template. So instead of saying, here's an S3 bucket, dump your data there, we say, okay, here is the best practice for collecting events, user events from your microservice and getting them into the data lake. In this case, this template is based around Kinesis Firehose, which is a service from Amazon Web Services that collects these single events, batches them up, and then writes them out to some data store, in this case S3. So I wanted to highlight this as an example of how, in the real world, we make this happen. Right? You can't just say, it's your responsibility, you do it. It's your responsibility, you do it, but with our help. And I think that's the model that we want to promote with this idea.
Yeah. So we want to make it as easy as possible for data producers, because we actually want them to publish the data. But the responsibility must be clear. So they have to be the ones driving this, ideally with the help from the central data team, enabling the data producers to do so and to fulfill their responsibility. So now let's look at the other side, which is the consumer's responsibility. So here we say data consumers are responsible for the definition and visualization of metrics and for driving the implementation and maintenance of these metrics. So we use metric as a pretty generic term here, so let's see what this means in terms of this example. So now we look at this special offer service team. Now we said they need the order history by user in order to fulfill their service, right? So let's say they need this in order to create meaningful special offers. Now, the data for this is in the data lake, the actual data about the orders that happened, because the checkout service is publishing them to the central data lake. But it may not be in there necessarily in the right format or way as it is needed by the special offer service to provide this service. And now, in this organizational structure that we present here, it is the responsibility of the data consumer to build this view or materialized view or transformation or whatever in such a way as they need it. And this is quite different to how it had been at Scout before, and also different to how we see it at other companies, where quite often you would see something like people from the special offer service team going to the central team and maybe asking them, well, can you provide us with this table or view? And then the central data team would say, yeah, sure, we put it into our backlog, and maybe we can do this like beginning of next quarter or something. And then the special offer service team, they would need to wait for it. Or maybe they would go directly to the checkout service team and ask them to provide a special stream of data that's tailored for that specific application or something. And we do not want that. We want that the data consumer has the responsibility to build this. And the reasoning here is very similar to the reasoning why we say that the data producer needs to have the responsibility to publish data and metadata. We believe that ultimately only the actual stakeholder, the actual people who are interested in the data for their application, they know how this data needs to be structured. So they need to drive this implementation of that view or whatever it is. When they push this responsibility to someone else, there will be misunderstandings, they will have to wait. This way, when they drive it themselves, they are more autonomous and they can independently work with this. Of course, as with a data producer, this doesn't mean that they have to do it without help. That absolutely means they can get help from the experts in the data team, but they have to drive it. And also, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't talk to the people from the checkout service. They should actually, because they need to understand what is in those order events in order to build that view correctly. And so with this, I come to the last principle we're presenting here today, which is transparency over continuity. And here we say we value data transparency over data continuity, which means we break metric comparability if it is for the cause of enabling better insights. And this may need some explanation. So what do we mean here with data continuity? So in any bigger company, especially public listed ones, there are certain numbers like traffic, revenue, etc., where certain people get quite nervous when those numbers drop or change dramatically. So many people are interested in having kind of a stable development of those numbers from month to month. Yeah, and I think Sean.
And as I'll give a concrete example in this case. We're a web platform, of course. We're a classifieds platform where there's a lot of bot traffic. So lots of different people are scraping our website and again and again and again. And this actually is a large amount of the raw sessions that we see. So when we report numbers such as the number of sessions from our users to the markets, or if we use that internally, we need to be very careful about how we filter out bot traffic, right? Because we know that it's a large proportion. And in this case, we want to be able to say if we improve that filtering of bot traffic, the number of sessions will go down, and that's okay. That's what we want, right? We want it to be correct, and we prefer that, and we prefer the explanation of, hey, we improved this, so it went down. We prefer that transparency and that correctness over the continuity. We just put this in here to give us the right to do the correct thing, to say, no, we're not going to maintain that thing just because it's been done like that since the beginning of time.
I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't value this month-to-month comparability, but it simply stresses that we believe that really, if you do not understand what the data actually means, then in the end, it's worthless. So the transparency should really be the most important thing about data.
Do you bridge when there is a change and you know there's a change, do you somehow adjust for that when looking at the data?
In some cases, so the question was, if there's a change, do we correct for that change? Do we try to correct probably the older data? We tend not to. We'll just explain, okay, here's a jump, and here's the reason for that drop. If it was for the financial markets, if it's revenue or something like that, then I think we have to explain it and reissue old statements and everything. Like, it gets really nasty when it comes to revenue. For everything else, it's kind of okay to just explain it. It's done. This is the new way that we do it.
Yeah, I mean, another model you can apply there is to kind of let the old way the metric works go on and have the new one in parallel and kind of explain what the difference is, and then basically get rid of the old one at some point after they were running in parallel for a while. All right, so to summarize what we want to achieve with all of this, we want to have a federal landscape of data producers and data consumers with just enough shared norms to ensure seamless cooperation without severely impeding autonomy. So this is all about the individual teams being able to act autonomously and independently work with data, share data, and are able to work on their own. So now, what are the consequences of all of this for the individual product teams on the ground? So they now have to think a lot more about data and reporting. They basically have to have this in the back of their mind all the time. They have to deliver their data to the data lake. They have to think like, when do we start delivering data? When do we change the data? When we change something in our product? And they also have to provide the metadata, and they have to change the metadata when something changes. And furthermore, we very much encourage for them to, so to say, eat their own dog food. And by this, we mean that they consume their own data. And a nice example is kind of a service or product dashboard, which is built on the data that is published to the data lake. Because this way, if a product team has this dashboard, then they will be the first to see when something is wrong with the data delivery, or when suddenly only zeros are delivered or something like that. So altogether, this puts quite a burden on the product teams, and much more responsibilities, and also much more required skills. So a model that we applied a few times quite successfully here is what we call an analyst, or sometimes a data engineer in residence, how we call it. And the idea here is that we take a person from the central data team, so basically from the data experts, and put that person in the product team for a limited amount of time, let's say something like 3 months or something, and then let that person help this team to bootstrap all of those things and help them to understand what is the idiomatic way to work with the data landscape, and really help them across this line where they can take this responsibility on their own. So this were kind of what was kind of the burden that they have to take. Now, what do they get from this, the product teams? They can now work in this responsibility structure much more independently with data, also with their own data. They do not have to wait anymore for some data team or whatever to provide them with their analytics. And also, if all the teams are doing it like this, it's also much easier to consume data from other teams. So overall, what this means is what they get are faster product and measurement iterations. So they can develop their product much more quickly, change things more quickly, and measure things more quickly. And we've really seen this when we introduced this structure, that before that, basically quite a few product teams were really blocked. They couldn't move anymore because they were constantly waiting on the central data team to provide something or to fix something, and they couldn't go on. And with introducing this different structure, this was really for some teams liberating in the sense that suddenly they could move again, and they could really take that responsibility, but really get the autonomy by that. So, so this is really what they get from it. So now we heard more responsibilities, more required skills on the one side, but fast iterations and more autonomy on the other side. And to me, that sounds a lot like DevOps, or what DevOps for me is all about. So for me, DevOps is a culture that is all about getting away from, or moving away from, having a centralized operations team with all the operations knowledge centralized in that team, to a structure where the operations knowledge is much more widely distributed across the company, and where basically every developer has to have some operations knowledge. It doesn't mean that every developer needs to be an operations expert, but just enough operations knowledge so that individual product teams can take over responsibility for deployment and operations. And what DevOps gives the product teams is much more autonomy about the operation of their services. They can deploy their services on their own, and they have control about their services and their deployment. And ultimately, that means they can deploy much more often and can iterate independently and autonomously over their services. So now, what we just explained in this talk about the organizational structure that we present here sounds very similar. And that is why we call it DataDevOps. And what we mean with DataDevOps is exactly this, that the knowledge and the skill set about dealing with data and with data analytics is much more widely distributed across the company, so that basically in every product team, the developers, the product managers, and so on, they know enough about data and analytics so that they can take over responsibility, ideally with the help from data experts, but still they can actually take over the responsibility. And what they get from this is that they can act autonomously and independently with data. And this way, the entire company can be data-driven at scale.
But how do you convince them to go along? Right? So those are all the benefits. It's like, OK, here's the idea in theory. We have this document. Everybody's read it. Everybody nods their head. Yes, OK, that all sounds good. I agree that this is something good. How do we actually get to that point? How do we convince everybody to today, convince them to adopt these ideas? The first thing I start with as a product manager, as a product owner on this team, is I promote the hell out of this platform. Right? I treat the platform as a product itself. My customers are the engineers, are the product teams, are the different functions within the organization. I can't just build this and assume people will come. I have to build it. I have to listen to them. I have to build features that correspond directly to the needs of my consumers. And I need to, it's basically as simple as treating this as a product. You would never develop a product and then never promote it, right? And that's the same thing we have to do here. And that means me coming on stage here. I'm not doing this for you, I'm sorry. I'm doing this so that I can go back to my organization and say, hey, everybody at NDC in Oslo thinks this is awesome. You should too. I also promote it internally, blog posts and internal talks. Here's the new features. I show things off. And I think that's exactly what anybody creating a centralized platform, be it a data platform, be it a data science platform, be it a cloud platform, some sort of central team within the organization that's purpose is to accelerate the organization, you still have to promote this internally. So that's the main thing. That's the main part of my job. The next thing is extremely practical. We still have this old data warehouse. That picture that I showed to you from 2007, we still have this infrastructure, and we still have use cases based on that. So I have to, the other half of my job is saying no. People come to me and they say, OK, we need this new thing based on this old data. I have to get in the habit of really, really, really saying no. I have to protect my relatively small team to work on the platform, the thing that we really believe in, the thing that we think will push forward the company, and not on this historical stuff. Now, I can't always do that. Of course, the business has to go forward. But as a general rule, as a default, we say no, we refuse new use cases. In some cases, even maintenance. We've let things just die, which is also kind of fun. And finally, we need to nudge our users to participate in the data landscape. And this nudge is in quotes because it comes from a very well-known book. A lot of you have probably read it or have heard of it anyways, from Richard Thaler and Susstein, where they talked about building nudges into things like your retirement savings program, into organ donation and to blood donation, these sort of things that typically government-sponsored that help the society as a whole, but the individual doesn't really see the reason why they should go along with it. So the idea of building a nudge is to make it easier to participate in this scheme, in this platform, in this program, than to not. Right? The default is to participate. And to do that specifically, I'll give you 4 examples of what we're doing in our data platform. The first one is automatic table publishing. So if you've dealt with data lakes, the idea is a whole bunch of data goes in there. It's not really useful for anything immediately. What you need to do is make an external table in Hive or some sort of a definition of that to make it queryable by Hive or Presto or something like that, to make it available in the BI layer. We can do that automatically for you. You dump the data in there, we infer the schema, we publish a temporary table, find all the partitions, make it fast to query within the BI tool. If you move completely out of the data platform and do this on your own, you can, right? Every team can make their own S3 bucket. They can set up their own Hadoop cluster and do this kind of stuff. They have to manage this themselves. They have to manually create these tables or anything. So there's one thing that we do for them to make it easier than to not. The second one is backup and disaster recovery. This is not an easy thing to get right, and it's also something that teams don't want to deal with themselves, right? If you put your data in the data platform, in our data lake, we'll take care of it. We'll make sure that it's backed up properly. We will be there on call if there's a huge disaster, if Amazon, a whole availability zone goes down. Very surprising, but if it happens, we'll be there to recover the data as fast as possible. You can put your data into the data lake as the only place that it exists. You can push it in there and forget for compliance reasons, for whatever. If you just need to store something somewhere and forget it, this is the place to do it. To do that on your own is a lot more work. Access control for restricted data. This is GDPR. I had to say it. Every talk has to say GDPR at some point in time. And we can deal with that nasty access control for you. You just to tell us what is PII and what is not. We can make sure what needs to be anonymized and what doesn't. We can do that anonymization for you to allow the company to do the analytics it needs without compromising the privacy of your users. And finally, we can automatically optimize file formats. So there are much more efficient ways than just writing CSVs or JSON to a data lake. If you convert it to Parquet, it's a columnar format. It's much faster for certain types of querying. We can do that for you sort of automatically. You don't even need to know what Parquet is. We could just do that. We can make it efficient, so it's faster for the consumers of this data to get out the data. So those are 4 examples of just how we make it easier to participate in the data landscape than to not. And so as we wrap up, so this is just the final couple slides of this talk. Learnings and lessons from this whole process. So this is so far, we're not actually done, right? It's an ongoing process. But in the end, we realized that you can't just have a technical change, you can't just have an organizational change. Often it's the cultural aspects that need the most work and are the most difficult to change within an organization. We didn't, at the beginning of this talk, in the first 10 minutes, we had the technical and the organizational thing and everything was perfect. That doesn't mean the organization is going to use it. You need to really change people's minds about how this fits into their day-to-day lives. And that's a cultural change. You build in features that give benefits that counteract resistance. So this is a bit on the nudges, but it's also look at what your users need. What are their needs? What are their current frustrations? And design things to make it easy for them to get beyond that. They'll become happy customers, and that's really what you want when you think of a platform as a product. And I'll say it again, the promotion, communication, you have to communicate around this stuff. There's really no way to do this otherwise. Communication is very, very, very important with this kind of thing. And most importantly, the final slide, I think, and this is my opinion is that you need a strong opinion when you build something like this. Building a platform in the center of a company, building AWS, building Azure, is a statement about how you think software development, how product development should be done. And I think it's a very strong opportunity. We are the experts when it comes to data and what data means and the opportunities around data. We should build a platform that encodes, that somehow promotes that opinion about how the company should be data-driven. Right? This is not just solving a technical problem. This is us building something to influence the entire organization. So if you're building a platform, be it a cloud platform, be it a data platform, be it any kind of centralized platform, have an opinion, have a vision about how this affects your whole organization, and use that to lead the company in the direction you want it to be. And thanks for your time. Yes, thanks. So we have time for questions, I guess, right?
Yeah, quite a bit, I guess.
The question is, how do you deal with quality when the team starts providing data and at some point something breaks and something is wrong coming in? Who is responsible? Who is initiating the issue and so on, and how do they deal with that?
I can, if you want, I can take it.
Go ahead.
So the question is, how do you deal with quality? If there's something wrong with the quality of the data, how do you deal with that? And this is probably a central point, because before, this central team dealt with that, right? It was their SLA to provide good quality data. They curated and maintained the data. Now, it's not our responsibility. It's the producing team's responsibility. And it basically takes us out as a middleman. It doesn't mean that there's less need for quality. It means that the person who's actually doing it, who's actually producing it, the one who has the ability to screw it up, is the one who's responsible for the quality. And I think that fits much better.
So do they monitor it themselves? If they don't consume it, they don't know maybe that they've broken something.
Yeah.
If they don't consume it, they don't know.
Yeah, that's why I came up with this example of like having their own dashboard that uses their own data. So this is exactly a means to yeah, kind of. It's an effective means for quality control in that sense. But obviously, there will be cases where the quality will be poor. Probably it will be the consumer of the data who will recognize this. And yeah, I mean, it is an open issue, but yeah, we believe it must be the data producer. How it has been before, where the central data team had to maintain the quality, we often found ourselves in a situation that we didn't even know what a good quality of that data was, because we didn't understand the data, and yeah, we're not the domain experts for that data. So we realized it has to be at the place where the data is generated.
Yeah, and there's actually another piece to this puzzle that we didn't talk about. There's this data catalog that we talked about kind of briefly. We have a data catalog in the sense of a meta store of tables. But we also have another product on top of that. It's called Alation, which is sort of a conversational, wiki-style description of all the data in the organization. So the piece the reason why we have this piece is to give the consumers of the data the ability to tell other consumers, hey, don't trust this data, or whatever, right? So it's not that we provide good data. We want to be transparent about the data that's there and make sure that the understanding of it is spread out within the organization. Perhaps it doesn't need to come every day. Maybe it's data that's delivered occasionally, but that's still extremely useful. And that's okay, right? We don't really know what the definition of quality is. It's really, did somebody find this useful? Or did they find it lacking? And then they can tell people. Interesting. Do we handle, the question is, do we handle different performance requirements? You mean on the consumption side, right?
Yeah, like if you have huge data sets or if you have small.
Yeah, we try to be as general as possible. So our main querying mechanism is a EMR cluster running Presto. This uses external tables that are in, the data is in S3, and it's queried by this EMR cluster, this Hadoop cluster essentially, and then provides that to the BI tool. That is a general piece, I think, that fits. The optimization would come into what transformations are done, what aggregations are done on the data beforehand in some sort of batch processing offline to pre-process it to make it faster so that there's less data to consume. And we certainly do that on a case-by-case basis because some of it is just a report that runs in the middle of the night. Who cares if it takes an hour versus half an hour? Some of it is the operational dashboard for the executive team who wants to see the numbers change immediately. They want to do interactive ad hoc queries. Yeah.
I'm asking, do you have caches
on
top of the data lake?
Yeah. Do we have caches? No, not yet. and there's debate in the team whether we should or not. One obvious example is not to leave everything in S3, but to push it to Redshift, push the hot data to Redshift. We're fighting in the team whether this is a reasonable amount of whether the benefits, which are obvious, outweigh the added complexity and maintenance requirements for the team. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
What is the last principle in the manifesto?
Okay, yeah. so actually the last principle is a bit related to this question about quality. We believe that there are certain KPIs that are so important to be consistent and high quality across the company that they need to be maintained by the central data team. What would be an example of that?
It's actually not, there's not very many.
Yeah.
So even revenue is not one, but there is a separate team that's solely responsible for revenue. It's our count of customers, the number of listings our customers have, very, very sort of centric to the main business. It's we basically define it as what does the CEO need day to day? We'll provide that because he's demanding it of us. And anything else, he doesn't even care about sessions, actually. He cares about the customer side, the people placing the listings. That's much more important from a business point of view than the consumer side. Yeah.
And this principle, that we didn't mention is pretty much about this, that we do take care of the responsibility for those few core KPIs, mainly to state that we do not take care of all the other things. So it's really those very few things, and we clearly define what those few KPIs are. Yeah. So this is a bit specific to the company, which is why we didn't include it here.
Was it the revolution from the base or from the top? How much of the top management support did you have to push it through?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So the question was how much support did we have from the management, from the top to push this. So in fact, we developed this manifesto pretty much from within the data department. But then we did a lot of communication, as Sean mentioned. So we actually went to all of the... so first we discussed within the data department a lot to get in alignment within the data department on that manifesto to make sure we can actually speak with one voice. But then we kind of went to all the heads of the other departments and kind of gave them a sneak preview on that manifesto to kind of be able to explain them the consequences and the reasons about this. And we also went to the CTO and kind of explained this to him. So to really make sure we have this backing from the management, so to say, because indeed it is needed. But in the end, probably as Sean mentioned with the nudges and all, it's good to have this management backing, but it will not help you ultimately to achieve the goal. In the end, you need to help the people and solve their problems so that they actually follow along. But yeah, we did take care of that.
This reminds me of a different point. Someone asked me once, why a manifesto? Why do you call it a manifesto? And it goes towards this idea that a manifesto, you can't argue with a manifesto. Right? A manifesto is just an opinion. It's not a policy. It's not here's a statement, an objective for the quarter or an OKR or something like that. No, it's just, this is our opinion. As a central team, this is our opinion. And it's actually a very manipulative way to promote change within an organization, is to get it out there, get it so people refer to it. It's well known as being the best way to do things within the organization. but it's not so strong as a policy that people immediately fight it. And I think we didn't do this on purpose, but I think as a happy accident, it was actually very useful to call it a manifesto than to call it a policy.
Yeah, I think the idea there is that really you can refer to this manifesto and the principles whenever there's a decision about who has to take care of something or so on. You can actually refer to it and say, see, in this case, you are clearly in the role of the producer or of the consumer, and therefore it makes sense that you take care of this or you drive this and so on. It was quite helpful in the past.
Yeah, question?
How many versions of the manifesto do you have?
The question is how many versions? One. No, there was two. I think I saw an early version. It was before I joined, but I think there was...
Yeah, not that many yet, but
Yeah.
I think it's meant to be a living thing. I think just recently Marcus said that there is a new version planned, but yeah, actually it hasn't been that many yet. So it hasn't...
Yeah. And I would add things about privacy and personal data and how, what is the default way that we deal with personal data within the organization is something that I really want to add to the manifesto. Sort of privacy by default, I think, should also be our opinion when building data products.
Great.
Last question, or do we, yeah?
What about training of staff? What areas need the most training?
Training is the question. We need to do lots, I think, because this is new technology, it's a new approach, it's new, even development teams who are familiar with AWS don't know about the specific big data products of AWS. We probably should do more than we're doing. I think you actually can't have too much of this. It's really just like Salesforce will have trainings around how to use it and how to create interfaces to it and all that kind of stuff. If you treat this like a product, that's something that's really, really necessary, and probably also solutions engineers and this kind of thing to do the full circle of making sure that the consumers of this platform are supported and empowered to do what we expect of them.
And it's not only the technical side. Also, I think we did a few training sessions also on like hypothesis-driven product development, like how to be data-driven in the product teams, those kind of things.
They all have to learn BI tools.
Yeah.
Yeah. We currently have 50% of the employees in the company have an account in our BI tool, which went up substantially since we started pushing this idea. Before it was just an analyst here and an analyst there. Now it's supposed to be something that everybody should be using, at least occasionally, in their day-to-day work.
All right.
Okay, then thank you all for your attention.
Thanks a lot. So we used up all the time.
Yeah.
So thank you. That was very interesting.